a big game for the Buffaloes, a big opportunity. They mount a significant comeback down 28-20, taking a 28-24 lead after being down 21-7. They can't quite hold it for the Buffs, and they end up losing 31-28 to number 18 K-State. We talked about this last week, the idea that if they won the game, they would have been ranked. If they lost the game in double-digit type fashion, there would have been people all around the country saying, see, once again, the Buffs are frauds. Now they have to look at it and say, okay, the number 18 team in the country pulled it off, had a great comeback to go ahead and win that game. But you can't look at the Buffs and say they're frauds. You can't look at the Buffs and say they're for real. You can look at them and say they're not quite top 25 ready. But the trajectory for this team is still clearly pointing up.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you, and I'm happy to be here on Mile High Sports today. Hope everybody's doing well out there, and I heard you guys talking about it. What a brutal weekend for Colorado sports. My goodness. Avalanche, awful. Buffs, blew it. Broncos, boring. Just a tough weekend for the Colorado sports fan. But, that was a frustrating game to me, Shawn, because it felt like Colorado, we saw them make some second half adjustments. I thought the defense was doing better as the game had gone along. But the frustrating part to me is just kind of how it ended, because you go down there, you score the touchdown, LeJonte Wester, clutch stuff from the Buffs there with about under 6 minutes left to play in the game. And then you let Kansas State drive essentially the length of the field in 3 plays over the course of like 51 seconds to retake the lead. And so, just broken defenses. I thought, Shedeur Sanders was not very good in this one. And for all the people that like to chirp in me in the comment section on the SCO show, the argument that I made last week was no dumb penalties, but he was just straight up awful. And Coach Prime even came out, and I think the word that he used was terrible to describe Shedeur Sanders. The team,
rusty as well, yeah.
Yeah, the team might be better off. I don't want to say without him, but to kind of just insert him directly back in there in the manner in which they did, the secondary looked a little discombobulated. I don't want to make excuses either, though, but Travis Hunter and Jimmy Horn Jr. not being out there, that certainly, I think, impacted the flow of the offense. But to your point, the Buffs did not get blown out in this game, but it did feel like one of those matchups where it just kind of got away from the Buffs. And to me, that's frustrating. I thought with Shedeur with the ball in his hands, 2+ minutes left to play, essentially, I felt pretty good about their chances, but there was that dumb challenge that they made on the running back stepping out of bounds. So they lost a timeout there. Just a frustrating game, a winnable game for the Colorado Buffaloes.
Yeah, it was a winnable game, and that's what's hard to look at, especially you kind of look at the situation ifs don't solve things. But presuming that, quite frankly, they have either Horn or Hunter, they might win. If they have Hunter the whole game, you feel like they do win, because a couple of the breakdowns that happened probably don't happen on Hunter's watch. But that's also the game, and the truth of the matter is that's the potential risk of having Hunter play both sides of the ball. It's 2 different opportunities to get hurt every time you're out on the defensive side or the offensive side. So unfortunate there. Stunningly bad luck. Hunter gets hurt, Horn gets hurt. Omarion Miller, who had a tremendous game, also gets hurt. And then even Timmons Jr., who doesn't even play that often, he gets hurt. So you lose Terrell Timmons Jr. You lose 4 wide receivers in this game. Nevertheless, Shedeur Sanders does complete 34-40. That's an 85% completion percentage on 40 attempts, which is kind of nuts. 388 yards and 3 touchdowns. But again, one interception, and the one interception, a bad one. He was pressured, but throw up his back foot, sort it. The Buffs would have probably gotten at least 3 and maybe 7. So that's one of the situations in the game where you look at it and say that could have turned things around. So a bad play by Sanders. But otherwise, obviously, as bad as that breakdown was, I thought Shedeur Sanders, for the most part, was tremendous. Absorbed 6 sacks, had 1 carry for 13 yards, a late run for a first down they had to have. I thought he was great, minus that pick, although unfortunately that pick was pretty costly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head. To not get any points on that drive, to your point, would have likely at least generated 3 points, is certainly disappointing. And, had they been able to score a touchdown on that drive, I think that swings the momentum even more so in the favor of the Buffs, despite their ability to kind of clutch up there late in the fourth quarter before the inevitable game-ending play, which I know there's some controversy on. Was it PI? Was it not PI? I'm fine with the call. I agree with what the broadcasters were saying in the sense that it wasn't a catchable ball. But here's what I will say. I think Shedeur Sanders is a fabulous quarterback. I think he's probably one of the clutchest quarterbacks in college football. I think he's going to be great when he goes to the NFL. I'm not trying to take anything away from Shedeur Sanders, but on 4th and 6, I do not like throwing the sideline route to Will Sheppard. If that's
Right.
Travis Hunter, I feel a lot different about how that maybe, taking the chance, but that's not a high percentage play for Colorado on a play that you had to have. I would have preferred to see them try to work the ball over the middle of the field. To your point, Jimmy Horn Jr. was down, but LeJonte Wester was balling out. Will Sheppard had that one bad drop, but he made some good plays down the stretch as well. I just did not like, if you want to take that shot on 3rd and 6, right, which obviously it wasn't because of the penalties and whatnot, I'm okay with it. But on a play where you have to convert the first down to keep the game going, I just felt like that was, throwing up a little bit of a Hail Mary, say your prayers, and hope that you get a PI call on that. So I'm not one of those guys that's, upset at the refs. Oh, the refs stole this game from CU. I really don't subscribe to that thought whatsoever. I do think, could it have been PI? Absolutely. The defender's arm was wrapped around
all the way around at the outside. But
yeah.
I'm inclined to agree with you. The ball was maybe if the ball was more inbounds and not really high and trailing out of bounds. And on top of that, that the referees are loath to extend the game with the penalty to reward that necessarily. And look, it probably was pass interference if you're being technical. I don't have an issue with that not being called. That particular throw at that particular time with that particular type of contact. You can also make the argument, the defender's arm was on Sheppard's back, but was it impeding him? I'm not really sure that's the case, as both guys are diving backwards to catch a ball that wasn't even going to land in bounds. But I think with the Buffs, one of the things that is a challenge here, and yes, for some of the game, they obviously got a little sideways. But this game went into halftime 14-7 to Kansas State, and a one-score game for a good chunk of it. And once again, we watched the Buffaloes sort of refuse to run the ball. Dallin Hayden had tough sledding going forward, 7 carries for 11 yards in total, long of 3, and Isaiah Gustav had a long of 4. But, they never even gave Welch a carry, even though he was on the field at times. 10 carries in total for your running backs. Sanders, of course, ends up with 9 rushes, and sacks are considered part of that in college, so it's a little bit weird. But if you want to look at it that way, you're looking at 49 either passes or carries, including the sacks by Shedeur Sanders. So dropbacks or runs, 49 plays, 10 by your running backs. For a lot of this game, it was a one-score game. The Buffs, once again, whether it's Sanders, whether it's Shermer, whether it's Deion Sanders, not directing the previous 2, the Buffs have to get back to running the ball. You and I talked about this last week. If the Buffaloes could just keep K-State's defense honest, they'd be able to have a really good chance in this game. They had a good chance anyway, despite the fact they didn't even make an effort on the ground. Deion Sanders did fairly complain about it. In the end, the totals for sacks count against the ground game, as I pointed out, but the totals for the Buffs, 19 carries, negative 29 yards, whereas for K-State, 43 for $185 and 2 touchdowns. That is a recipe to lose every time, and to lose a game by worse than 3. In some ways, you could look at it and say the Buffs were lucky to keep it that close. A better defensive performance than I think they got credit for.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And they don't run the ball or really attempt to establish the run, even with Travis Hunter and Jimmy Horn Jr. out. And look, I know Omarion Miller popped off in this game when he was healthy. He finished with 8 receptions for 145 yards. Will Sheppard, 5 for 83. LeJonte Wester, 5 for 58 with 2 touchdowns. But, you got to keep Kansas State's defense honest here, and Colorado became a one-dimensional offense. And look, we know that they're going to try to pass the ball time and time again, just because of the nature of the beast and whatnot. But when you're able to at least have somewhat of a balanced attack, I think it opens up the play calling a little bit. But I also just thought the time management from the coaching staff was not great. I mentioned, challenging that play that was pretty obvious to only have 1 time out there at the end of the game. I'm not saying that if they had all 3, they would have won the game or anything like that, but they didn't do themselves many favors, and between the defense, kind of being shoddy there on the final drive, they allowed like a 40 or 50 yard gain on that wheel route on the second play of what would eventually be the go-ahead drive for Kansas State. That's the frustrating part to me, Shawn, is, again, it was a very, very winnable game. It was not like Nebraska where you were just clearly outclassed on every facet of the game for the most part. Colorado was in this one. I was worried that maybe they'd come out a little lethargic from the bye. They picked it up as the game went along, but also we've got to talk about this when it comes to the rushing attack. Shedeur Sanders was running for his life back there. I mean, the offensive line, while it has been better this year compared to last year, it looked like in this game against Kansas State that they had reverted to form a little bit. And again, when you're down Travis Hunter, you're down Jimmy Horn Jr., you're just putting the weight of the world on Shedeur's shoulders. So again, 9 times out of 10, I feel pretty confident that he's going to go down there and convert that 2-minute drill and get some points and take the lead for Colorado. But this is the 1 out of 10 that he did not.
Yeah, obviously it's a tough loss, but at the same time, you look at it, they're 4-2, 2 games away from bowl eligibility. They had a real chance in this game. You have to find a way to take away the positives. And the positives were they hung tight with a top 25 team. In fact, they argued they probably could have and should have gotten the win despite the injuries, losing the best player in college football. There is forward progress here. And for the Buffs, how do they take this forward? Is there a belief at any point that the Buffs can really commit themselves to the run, or is this just probably who they are? But if Hunter and Horn, let's say, can't play against Arizona, do you expect to see a change at least a little bit?
I really don't. Maybe in the first half, maybe they'll try, on the scripted first drive or whatever it might be, but we just know that they love to pass the ball. And I keep thinking back to that UCF game where the rushing yards were not necessarily, standing out on paper, but it did a lot, in my opinion, in regards to just kind of opening up the play calling and keeping UCF on their toes. And so, I can preach it all day. I scream about it on the Scotia with Chase and DB over there behind the glass that they need to establish the run. But at this point, you're 4-2. You mentioned 2 games away from bowl eligibility. I'm not trying to get too far ahead of myself here, but I think, it's about kind of showcasing the talent that you're going to have when it comes to, April's draft. And obviously Coach Prime wants to make sure that, Shedeur's getting every look, that Shedeur's making the plays. That was a bad interception by him, as we've talked about. But I really don't expect much of a difference from Colorado's offensive approach. Will they up it by maybe 10%, 15%? Sure. But in regards to like overhauling their game plan of like, all right, we're going to go into Arizona, we're going to be a run first team. That's not going to happen against any team down the stretch here, bearing an injury to Shedeur Sanders at this point.
Yeah, it ends up being a really, really challenging situation, I think, if Hunter is hurt for any stretch of time, and not as far as the wide receivers go. We talked about Miller, obviously great performance before he got hurt. Horn, if they can get even one of those guys back with Shepard and Wester, if you're talking about Horn or Miller and Shepard and Wester, I think you have enough on the receiving to still make things happen.
Absolutely.
And maybe that's something that the Buffs have to think about, but it is the defensive side. Colton Hood basically filled in, did get an interception that was tipped up. Preston Hodge tipped it up. Hood got it, ran it almost all the way back. And that gave the Buffs a chance. But Hood was also burned on that last touchdown to Jace Brown. And you have to avoid the breakdowns that you saw. You brought it up. The pass to Giddens, before the pass to Brown, that at least was covered reasonably well. Good play by the quarterback. Good catch. It's not what you want to give up. You don't want to give a 50-yarder in that spot. You probably needed a safety further back there as opposed to bring the pressure they brought. But it was the pass to Giddens, the 34-yarder, where he sort of snuck out on that wheel route and nobody went with him. That was, again, maybe a Shedeur Sanders thing. Rusty was being polite by Deion Sanders. Obviously, you think he's going to get better. He was second team All Pac-12 last year, but it did look like maybe, seeing as the Buffs had rolled off so many weeks of good play without him, that maybe rotating him in and getting him back into the game over time might have been a better choice than just dropping him into the lineup and giving him full snaps. But they'll have to take this on against an Arizona team which is more high flying than the K-State Wildcats. So that's going to be a challenge as well, especially if they don't have Hunter. But regardless, always love the opportunity to talk to you about this, because on the SCO show this week, there will be a lot to discuss. But for people who missed it, and you know what'll happen next Saturday, the game against Arizona, 2 p.m. on Saturday, National Fox game. What was the scene like out at number 38 in Rhino? Because, hey, they might have lost, but it went down to the buzzer. Everyone got their money's worth.
Yeah, I mean, number 38 has been an incredible host for us for all of our CU watch parties, man. I mean, packed out again, not a table open, not a seat open. It did file out a little quick after the Buffs lost the game, which you could naturally expect. And we're going to do it again next week for Arizona. And then I just saw the Cincinnati game is another 8:15 p.m. kick, man. I mean, I'm just, whatever. Like, I like it, right? But at the same time, like, I had to go produce Joe and Alex the next morning, and I got home at like 1:30, and I was like, oh my goodness. And I see this on the schedule again in a couple of weeks. So we'll have some fun with that. But yeah, no, number 38.
Getting home at 4.
Yeah, it's crazy, dude. Number 38 is an incredible partner. And also be sure to check out our friends over at Peckish, man. They're our new sponsor of the SCO show. Great pizza, great wings, one location up on the hill. They've also got their new location off of I-25 in Bellevue. So check out our friends over at Peckish, man. I'm dreaming about the wings. I'm dreaming about the pizza. And for game days as well, check us out at number 38. But to put a bow on it, Shawn, a disappointing loss for Colorado. I expect them to pick themselves up, play a little pissed off now against Arizona, try to right some of their wrongs, but they let one get away, and we'll have to see how they adjust moving forward.